So some people, rather than believing in Christ, went to the Pharisees to report to them that Jesus was nearby, what Jesus had done, but also that he was just a couple of miles from Jerusalem and presumably going to go to Jerusalem for the Passover. So this happened. All of this happened. The raising of Lazarus, sometime between Christmas and what we call Easter, which is when Passover would have been. This is Jesus' last Passover. Now, I told you already, we're not going to look at John 12, 1 through 8 yet. We will, but the curriculum doesn't address it just yet. Due to some timing things that we'll talk about when we get there. So, we'll pick up with verses 47 to 52, Caiaphas' devilish plan. So the Sadducees begin to become concerned, and we'll talk about why that is. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him, believed in Jesus. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, meaning the Sanhedrin, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So this lesson begins with where we ended up last lesson, the people going to the Pharisees to rat out Jesus for raising Lazarus from the dead. You would think they'd be happy for Lazarus. You would think that they would be amazed by what Jesus has done. But they're not. They're angry, and they see it as more reason to get rid of Jesus. And then the Sadducees also become concerned. So the Sadducees, why, I'm going to ask you, because I think you know, why would the Sadducees be concerned about the resurrection of Lazarus? Yeah, they don't believe it. They didn't believe in the resurrection. Now, when they say the resurrection, this isn't a one-to-one kind of comparison. When they say they didn't believe in the resurrection, it's the final resurrection, when everyone will rise and go to eternal life or eternal death. So that the resurrection is that. But Lazarus's resurrection is kind of looking forward to that, and it's proof that a dead body can be raised, that God can raise a dead body. God can do whatever he wants, right? He can do anything. And so this was problematic for them. Lazarus was this living, breathing example of a body, a dead body being raised to life, and that God can do that. So neither the Sadducees nor the Pharisees could deny the miracles. They saw them with their own eyes. They saw Lazarus. There were many Jews that were there. And when Jesus yelled, "Lazarus, come out," and this dead man comes out. And he'd been in there 4 days. So they couldn't deny the living proof walking around in front of them. And so this was further concern then about the public opinion in Christ's favor. He was becoming more popular. They thought that, because when they say they'll take away our nation, what they're concerned about is a revolution. What they're concerned about is that the Romans will crack down on them. That had happened before, and the Jews got a little bit feisty. Yes?
This is out there, but what if Lazarus goes in the
Yeah. I don't think that that's possible, because even though they didn't have modern medical devices, they were certainly able to protect the heartbeat. I mean, there's, I mean, anyone can do this, right? And so, I don't think that's possible. And I mean, if he was, he would have been screaming, right? He would have, help, get me out of here. And there was none of that. And there's nothing that we know of that would have caused a coma. He would just said he got sick and died. So anyway, the Roman government they were afraid the Roman government would step in and crush the Jews. And it wasn't an unfounded fear that there would be that the people would revolt. And in fact, in an earlier revolt, the Romans ostensibly annihilated the Jews. So they didn't want that to happen again. So they were going to stop Jesus at any cost. So Caiaphas comes up with this. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." So this is Caiaphas's unwitting prophecy. He had been high priest. He became high priest in AD 18, and so he'd been high priest for a long time at this point, and his father-in-law had been high priest before him. So the family had been in power for a very long time. And he witnessed Jesus' ministry from the beginning, his public ministry. And he was convinced that Jesus needed to be eliminated. So Caiaphas proposes that one person die for the nation. So killing Jesus to save the nation, to prevent the Romans from cracking down. What do you see the irony in this? What is he saying? He's saying exactly what Jesus is about to do. That is going to happen. He is going to die for others. It has nothing to do with a revolt. So Caiaphas wasn't the first person nor the last that lived by this philosophy of the end justifies the means. Do you understand what this means? The end justifies the means. Yeah. That's close.
And they're worth it. That doesn't matter.
That's close. But it means if the goal is good, how you get there doesn't matter. Like the good end makes however you got there okay. So you could use, let me give you an example. You could use the example of, well, if I cheat, I'll get a better grade. So the end justifies the end makes the means okay. And so that's what he's saying. Yeah, we're going to kill a guy, but look what we're going to get out of it. And so it's worth it. It justifies us doing this because we'll lose our nation if we don't. And there are so many times where throughout history where people have lived by that and to disaster. And in some sense, this is a disaster. In some sense, it's the greatest thing that happened in all of the world that Caiaphas got. And so what Caiaphas is saying is logical, but it's wrong. It's sin. It's unfair. And God's ways are not always like our ways. And we have to be careful about our own motives and our own logic when we make choices. But in the Bible, we see a number of things that seem to be logical, but they're wrong. So let's, in this case, it's all part of God's plan. So let's talk about some of these. So Cain offered the fruit of the ground. Cain brought a perfectly good sacrifice to God. He did the logical thing. but it wasn't acceptable. I think these other ones are better. Okay, so Abraham and Sarah were promised by God that they would have a child. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and finally they took things into their own hands. And it was his wife's idea. I do not understand this. Look, God's not given us the baby, so just go into Hagar, our slave, and have a baby with her, and then that son will be ours. And the book says that was logical. No, I do not believe that was logical. I believe that was one of the stupidest things any woman ever said. But it didn't work out, and it was wrong. They weren't willing, and listen to me, because this is important. Sometimes God gives us promises, and they don't happen for you. And in that time, we tend to get discouraged. And in that time, we tend to doubt God. Don't. Sometimes you have to wait. One of my bugaboos is when people ask God for something and He doesn't do it, and they say, God didn't answer my prayer. Yes, He did. If you asked me if you could go fill up your water bottle right now, and I said no, would you say, why didn't you answer my question? Did I answer your question? I answered your question. I answered it with a no. God has three answers. Yes. Those are the ones we like. No. And wait. Sometimes it's deferred. Yes. And it was for Abraham. And they weren't willing to wait. And that can be disastrous. And it was in the case of Hagar and Sarah. Sarah paid for that for the rest of her life. So I don't think that's logical. But Lot chose the fertile land. So Lot was Abraham's nephew, and they had all their stuff in common, and Lot had his slaves, and Abraham had his slaves, and they started fighting with each other over the land. And so Abraham takes Lot aside, and he says, look, let there be no enmity between you and me and your people and my people, for we are brothers. So here's what we're going to do. Here's the land. If you want that land over there, I'll take this land over here. If you want that land over there, I'll take this land over here. And they parted. So Lot's looking over the land, and he's like, yeah, it's okay. That's something. I could make bank off of that one. Yeah, I'm going this way, Abraham. Now, I think most people would have made that decision. If that was the best land, and Abraham gave you the choice, take that land. It's also worth talking about. And Lot got sucked in, and his whole family got sucked in to the lifestyle of Sodom and Gomorrah. And his wife ended up losing her life, and Lot and his children barely made it out. It was logical. It was the best land, but it wasn't right. David numbered his warriors before a battle when God said, don't do that. I don't know. I got to count. But God said, don't do that. Go in the battle. Which is interesting to me. It's logical in the world's terms, but it's interesting to me that shepherd boy didn't remember what he said. You come at me with swords, but I come with you. I come to you with the living God, the power of the living God. He didn't remember his troops, but he did. It was logical. It was wrong. Israel sought help from Egypt versus Babylon. I don't want to go into that one. And then Philip, when they had the little boy's lunch, he said, we just got this little lunch. Send him home. He couldn't see who Jesus was and what Jesus would do. It was logical. I think every one of us would know this is impossible. But not with Jesus. So these are some things that are illogical, but right. I don't know of anyone that would build a huge boat in the middle of the desert when it had never rained. And he's telling people, no, 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 it's going to rain. And they're like, what is rain? We don't know what rain is. And no, there's going to be a flood. What's a flood? We've never had a flood. What's a flood? And they thought he was crazy. And they derided him the whole time. It took him a very long time to build that boat. And especially because nobody helped him because they were all laughing at him. But it was right. Abraham offered his only son. That made no sense to me. Take your son, your only son, and go sacrifice.
So did God not recognize Ishmael?
Yeah, no. But he did bless Israel in certain ways. So anyway, that does not make sense. I have 3 children. I'm not doing that to any of them. You know, I might have spanked them when they were little. I might have gotten angry at them, but there's no way. But God told Abraham to do that. And he did it for a purpose. And it was an acted out prophecy. But Abraham obeyed. And that's the point of the story. It was the right thing to do. Now, in case anyone in here didn't actually sacrifice his son, okay, I just want to be clear. God brought it around. Moses commanded Israel to look at a brass serpent for healing. That sounds a little bit like an idol, doesn't it? And it actually ended up becoming an idol, which is why Moses destroyed it. But these snakes, these venomous snakes, came into the camp, and when you were bit, if you looked up at the bronze serpent, you were healed. Once again, that is prophecy that Christ would be lifted up for our healing. Joshua defeated Jericho by marching around it. I would have loved to have seen that pep talk. Okay, here's what we're going to do. No, you don't need weapons. You put the weapons away. No. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to march. And then we're going to shout. And then they're all going to die. And I'm pretty sure somebody, there's guys like, yeah, let's go! They're like, I think I have some pressing business to do. It doesn't make any sense, but it was right. And by the way, the archaeology backs up that the walls fell in an instant. We'll talk more about that next year. Gideon defeated the Midianites with pitchers, lamps, and 300 men. So here's what he had: this huge army with weapons. And God said, you know what? You got too many folks. You need to get rid of some of them. And so he got rid of some of them. He said, yep, still too many. Get rid of some. And then he tells them, okay, take everybody down to the stream, and everyone who just laps out of the spring with their tongue, get rid of them. The ones that, do this, keep them. And he ended up with 300 men. The Midianite army was the greatest fighting force on the planet at that time, or in that area at that time. And then he said, okay, now you got to get rid of your weapons. Just throw them away. You don't need no weapons. Just get rid of all the weapons. And he did. And in the night, they took their torches and their pitchers and their lamps, and they made a big noise with breaking all this pottery. And the Midianites woke up and were, when you wake up and you're like not awake, and you get out of bed and you're in the bathroom, you're like, how did I get here? And, you're like, so they were all like that. And they thought the Israelites were upon them. So they start taking out their swords and just start slashing stuff. And they killed each other. And the Israelites won the battle.
It wasn't much of a battle.
That was not much of a battle. And God did all of it. God did all of that. That was completely illogical. But it was good. It was right. And then Saul, looking out at this giant, doesn't say, I'll slay the giant. He says, hey, little boy, you go and slay the giant. Doesn't make sense. but it's right. So the Sadducees grow concerned, and we've gone through all of this, so it's just showing that to you again. And then Caiaphas makes this unwitting prophecy. He did not say this when he said that it's better that one man die for the nation. He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad, to save everyone. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. So we're going to stop here. We'll pick up here tomorrow. I'm hoping we'll finish tomorrow. That will help us stay on track. And you'll be able to take that quiz. We'll take that quiz as a class, so you have it available to study for your test. Make sure you're looking at that study guide here. You want to see my dog's footprints if you want attention. And this was on the floor next to my chair. So
My dog sat on the ones just like do tests and stuff to like do your job and you're just a nurse.
Yeah.